I want to welcome you to today's webinar. Today is Wednesday, July 19th, 2023, and our topic this week is unleashing the hidden power of user-generated content to drive engagement and profit. Before we go any further, I'd like to welcome and thank today's speakers. First off, we have Nick Kaplan. He's the Chief Growth and Innovation Officer at Sadia Group. Jazz Foster, Consumer Insights Manager of Challenger Brands at Colgate-Palmolive. Ryan Monahan, CMO of Redcon One, and Gautam Kanamuru, the CEO and co-founder at Yogi. Thank you so much for being with us today. Looking forward to chatting with you all. Speaking of Yogi, I want to thank them for sponsoring the webinar today. This production is not possible without their support. I also want to give a shout out to Scott, Maeve, and Robert, all of whom are off screen helping to make this webinar a success. And of course, thanks to all of you, the audience, for joining us. We hope you enjoy the webinar today. All right, let's dive in. Our next webinar is going to be on Wednesday, August 2nd, when we take a deep dive into composable commerce. This is going to be with Bright Sellers, Commerce Tools, and Applied Digital. Led by the one and only Scott Silverman, our panel will look at the pros and cons of building e-commerce platforms and systems that prioritize flexibility, modularity, and integration through the use of API-driven architecture. To register, just click on the link we just added in the chat. Do you want to watch a Commerce Next webinar or conference session you've missed? Looking for some insight on almost any digital commerce topic? Well then, boys and girls, you're in luck, because our YouTube channel has over 300 videos, including over 60 from our e-commerce growth show that we just included last month. Head over to youtube.com/commerce next to visit. It's also the summer of solo here at Commerce Next. Our friends over at Solo Brands have graciously given us a bunch of their super cute Mesa Mini Solo Stoves to give out to our community. Side note, I love my Solo Stove. Absolutely love it. All you got to do to have a chance to win one is to head over to our Instagram page and like the most recent post for a chance to win one. We will pick one lucky winner later on this afternoon. Got a couple other housekeeping notes here for you. Don't worry about missing anything. We're going to be recording this webinar. We'll make it available later tonight or tomorrow at the latest. Let me take a moment to show you where things are on your screen. In the upper right-hand portion, you'll see you can find the chat, Q&A, polls, and handout tabs. You can use those to interact with our panel with each other and to download information. Chat, so where you can give our speakers high fives and interact with other audience members. If you have a question for a panel, we want you to use the Q&A tab to ask it. Now, you may ask why. Well, we ask that because we want you to be able to use the upvote button. Now, the upvote button is going to signal your interest in the question. The more upvotes we get for a question, the more likely it is we'll get to it with our panel. In the Handouts tab, you're going to be able to download the slides from today's presentation, as well as other useful information that we have available for you. Finally, if you are joining us on this webinar replay, please note you can find the handouts by clicking on the document icon in the lower right of your screen. All right, let's take a look at what we're covering today. First off, got a brief presentation by Gautam Kanamuru on how you can unleash the hidden power of user-generated content to drive engagement and profit. Got a couple of audience poll questions for you. We do this because it gives the panelists and everyone in the audience an understanding of where we're all stand on this. Finally, time talking all things UGC with our expert panel. All right, let's get this ball rolling. Let's start by welcoming Gautam Kanamuru. He is the co-founder and CEO of Yogi. Gautam, welcome back to the Commerce Next stage.
Thanks, Alan, for having me. Excited to be here.
Absolutely. I'm going to hand it over to you, and I'll see you when you are done, sir.
Yeah, sounds good. And just to reiterate what Alan said, thanks everyone for attending. Really excited to be here to talk about kind of the hidden power of user-generated content, or UGC, as I'll refer to it, and just helping kind of lean more in and drive more engagement and profit from this very unique kind of data source or marketing channel. So the problem that we hear from just a lot of the brands that we interact with is, in a lot of ways, UGC has the ability to both make or break a brand. When done well or when utilized well, it definitely is one of the most effective forms of marketing. But when done poorly, it can really be a massive time waste, money sink, and even in a lot of ways sort of handicap or hinder your brand. So the question that we kind of talk with a few clients amongst others is just how do we make sure to get the most out of UGC? And to kind of start talking towards at least what we see as one of the solutions to this problem, it's probably worth framing kind of how we hear brands think of UGC. Because honestly, while there is some overlap, it's not necessarily a uniform definition for user-generated content. What we have generally seen is people kind of think of different forms of UGC in sort of two buckets. First, you have operational, and then you have marketing. So what do we mean by operational? Generally speaking, what we hear when we talk to certain companies and brands is they think of things like support tickets or customer calls that come into your customer support centers, reviews and ratings, NPS surveys. It's kind of more under your operational bucket of UGC. So what we mean by this is it's important to make it easy for your consumers or your users to be able to plug into these channels, provide these. It does sort of help from a conversion perspective or user experience perspective, but it's not there to necessarily generate more sales per se. Versus on the other end, what we tend to see is the marketing bucket of UGC. So these are things like, hey, product placement, influencer reviews and testimonials, brand advocates, the kinds of user-generated content that are meant to put your brand or your product in front of more people and hopefully influence them to purchase. And what we generally see is that most brands treat these as completely separate buckets. They really bifurcate the two and think of them as separate data sources owned by separate teams and with having different goals. But as we've kind of talked to brands and seen a few be successful with dealing with kind of user-generated content, what we've seen is they kind of think of the model in a little bit of a different way. The way that they tend to think about it is one stacking on top of the other. So again, if you just look at the general phrase user-generated content and what it can actually mean, you can almost divide it up into two blocks that sit on top of one on top of the other. So first you have just general feedback. Again, those support tickets, reviews and ratings, and NPS surveys. And then you have the marketing focused ones, product placement, influencer reviews, brand advocates. And really what it is using the information that you're able to pick up and learn from the feedback side of things to really influence what goes on in the marketing side of UGC. So instead of this bifurcated system, the question kind of becomes, what if we saw the user feedback as sort of the foundation for the marketing focused UGC? Putting it in another way, what if we turn this feedback into strategy, pretty much? And so what does that kind of look like? When you look at sort of the feedback that you get from reviews, NPS surveys, support tickets, they really are your audience's way to tell you exactly what they want from your brand. And if you use this data in the right way, it gives you answers to really, really important questions. So things like, hey, what attributes do my customers like? What about my competitors' customers? What marketing claims are resonating more with my customers? Or where do gaps exist in kind of the current market that I can address? And then just a multitude of other questions. How are consumers reacting to a new change in the product? Are there sort of mismatches of expectations? Even just like, how does one of these data sources or all of them combined correlate with sales data? But the important thing to note, and where it really starts to come into turning this feedback into strategy, is how do we use the answers to these questions that we can get from sort of that foundational element and use them to feed into just all of our marketing campaigns, whether it is what do we want certain influencers to emphasize in their conversations, or how can we kind of like push in that direction a little bit, or what are the claims that we should be really focusing on from just an overall marketing standpoint. A great example that we've seen, and I'll definitely touch on a few examples with kind of a few of our clients, is just being able to understand that, hey, here's one very specific attribute that we do really well at compared to the market. And we know that a large proportion of customers really care about that. So what if we just double down on that from all of our messaging, from what we kind of have various sort of marketing channels emphasize? And that downstream really starts to add on itself and make a big difference. So that's kind of the turning the feedback into strategy side of things. But the second question that definitely kind of comes up is, okay, now I have to get answers to these questions, and how are we able to do that? So each one of these data sources that I'm kind of talking about really do help in feeding into these questions. But the one that we wanted to double down on or really talk about was essentially the reviews and ratings side of things. And so this is reviews and ratings, and helping brands analyze reviews and ratings is what we live and breathe at Yogi. And the reason is because we see a lot of sort of unique benefits that come with this data source that tend to be underappreciated. When a lot of people think of reviews and ratings, they tend to think of them as, hey, I need to have some critical threshold of volume and some critical threshold of average star rating. I need to have at least per product 200 reviews and a 4.3 star rating. But when you take a step back and think about what reviews and ratings are, they really are this unfiltered focus group of tens of thousands of actual purchasers. And so it's large volumes of data that come directly from real consumers. And pretty much what they're doing is they're just openly telling you their likes and dislikes. Oftentimes they'll tell you both their likes and their dislikes in the same review. And so just being able to parse that at scale gives you a really, really thorough understanding of just where does the overall sentiment around your product, around your brand, around your category, around the market, what is really driving it, and where can changes be made. The other thing is that it is actually a very open data source, which means the same information is available for competitors as well. And so you can really start to get down to the level of understanding, hey, how do consumers think about the taste of my product? How does that compare to this specific competitor? How has that changed over time, for example? How does that compare on a specific product, even a specific SKU in a lot of cases? And there's just honestly a multitude of other sort of kind of benefits that tend to come with this data source. But I think it's one that tends to be underappreciated, and one that we always like to talk about, because the frame of reference from this perspective helps you honestly just squeeze more out of the sponge. And there's a few examples from just a few brands that we've worked with that we wanted to highlight that kind of help tie this together. So the first one is Nestle is a brand that we work with, specifically Coffee Mate. And one of the things that they were able to find through reviews and ratings is that the amount of people talking about using Coffee Mate and not just coffee was essentially steadily increasing. And actually, it wasn't just Coffee Mate, it was coffee creamers as a whole. But no brand was taking control of this narrative. And so there's a lot of people talking about, hey, I use this in ice cream, or my kids use this in ice cream. I use this in my tea. I use this in my hot chocolate. I even use this to bake. And so what Coffee Mate was able to do is identify this early and lean into just various marketing channels to essentially take control of this conversation. And so this is an example that was kind of posted on social media, where you can see it's kind of a hot chocolate cup there, fall themed, with the Coffee Mate kind of product placement. And what this allowed sort of Coffee Mate to do is again, take control of the narrative and actually start to drive more conversation about using coffee creamer and all kinds of other products, and starting to see that a large majority of that conversation in the, maybe we call it creamer market instead of the coffee creamer market, was of using that product in other types of products, was starting to be driven towards Coffee Mate. And so that's just one interesting example of almost kind of noticing a trend, if you will. The second one is Tula, who essentially kind of during that COVID timeframe was able to see that the amount of people talking about UVB light, essentially, that reflects off of your computer screen were starting to go up. So the idea is we're all stuck in inside. It's everybody's staring at their computer 10 hours a day. What does that kind of light do to my skin? And so this was another one where they were able to kind of take control of the narrative, position a product accordingly, a sunscreen product that explicitly had kind of a UVB or blue light protection claim, and also make sure to sort of help the conversation be driven across the board. So this was mentioned on their product pages, on their packaging, as part of various ads they were running, as well as kind of just influencer ads that are obviously very important in the skincare space. So you can see kind of a call out, and in the closed captioning, the person explicitly talking about kind of the blue light protection and how interesting it was. And again, this is being able to recognize a trend, recognize a gap, and controlling the narrative from that perspective. But it's really using the customer feedback to inform and being very targeted about what you're getting out of your downstream campaigns. And then the third one is with Tylenol, and just about kind of setting expectations. So this is an interesting one where Tylenol, a few years ago, came out with a powder version of Tylenol called Tylenol Dissolve Packs. So powder version, it comes in an individual package. You're supposed to rip it open and pour it in your mouth, and you're good to go, pretty much from a pain relief perspective. But what they were able to find, interestingly enough, is that when the product first released, it wasn't doing amazing, and the star rating of the overall product was kind of underperforming. But by, again, diving into the feedback and using that to inform the changes, as opposed to kind of guessing or running other marketing studies downstream, what they were able to find by diving into the reviews is that it was actually more of a mismatch of expectations. Specifically, what people were doing is they would see the word dissolve. They were used to things like liquid IV or emergency, where you rip it open and you pour it in water. And although this product is called Dissolve Packs, it actually isn't made to dissolve in water. If you pour it in water, the powder just sits at the top. So there's a lot of people saying, hey, I put this in my water, I've been shaking my water bottle for 5 minutes and nothing happens. But by being able to introduce new copy, new messaging, new images that clearly state kind of no water needed, or water bottle with an X through it, all that good stuff, they were able to essentially reset expectations with consumers, eliminate a lot of one-star reviews that were coming about people who are pouring it in water, because now people knew the expectation not to do that. And that led to kind of organic star rating increases, and therefore kind of a conversion rate increase as well. And so I think the interesting thing that these examples help paint for folks is the ability to kind of not think of a lot of these data sources or as kind of bifurcated channels, but really at least just being able to use consumer feedback as a feeding mechanism for decisions made downstream. Because what it honestly becomes in a lot of ways is a force multiplier, right? It's not necessarily going to, or instead of thinking of it as kind of a single thing, how does it make everything 10% or 20% better? So that's kind of the examples I wanted to walk through. Just putting my email there in case anybody has any questions, but happy to kind of hand it back to Alan and jump into the rest of the webinar.
All right. Very good. Thank you so much for giving us that great talk. I really appreciate it. We're going to move on to poll questions here, but I can't help myself. I've seen all kinds of names in the chat come up from Columbus, Ohio, and Miami, and we even have someone from Armenia with us today. So thank you all for being here. It's one of the little joys of running a webinar to see some familiar names and see what kind of, who's joining us from where. So thank you for putting those in the chat. All right. This is some poll time. We'd like to get everyone's, let's go right into it. First question I got for the audience: which forms of user-generated content are most useful to you? And I'd like you to pick your top 3. Which forms of user-generated content are most useful to you? Is it ratings and reviews, social media posts, user photos and videos, product Q&A, blog posts, and guest articles, or other? All righty. Well, it looks like we have roughly a three-way tie between the first three, which I kind of expected. Ratings and reviews, social media posts, user photos and videos, all doing strong. Social media posts slightly edging out the other two. Of our other answers, we see that blog posts and guest articles and product Q&A are there. What else do we have? That's about it. Looks like I'm going to close that one out here. Looks like it's going to be a three-way tie between ratings and reviews, social media posts, and user photos and videos. That's kind of what I expected. All right, let's close that one out. Next question. Which of the following best describes your current use of customer reviews in your business strategy? I'm going to tie this one into Gotham's presentation. Which of the following best describes your current use of customer reviews in your business strategy? Number one, or A, we actively analyze and leverage customer reviews to inform our decision-making and product improvements. Your second option is we occasionally consider customer reviews, but there's room for improvement. Or C, we've not really incorporated into our business strategy. Again, we're thinking about this from a strategy perspective. So this is interesting. I guess this is kind of where I thought it was going to be. So it looks like 80% plus of you are either actively analyzing and leveraging or occasionally considering it. But there is about 15% of you that are not yet incorporating customer reviews into your business strategy. So we're seeing it split about evenly, maybe slightly more on the strategic side. So I'm going to close that poll and leave answer A as our winner, actively analyzing and leveraging. Good for you. Good for you. So question 3. How do you encourage the creation of user-generated content? Pick your top 3. Do you offer incentives, host contests and giveaways, highlight specific user content, perhaps partner with influencers, offer recognition, personalize outreach, or other? Let us see where we are at with this. So it looks like highlight specific user content is actually in the lead. 22% of you are doing that. Right behind it is personalized outreach and offering incentives. About 20% of you are doing that. Partner with influencers. That's the fourth most common. Host contests and giveaways. About 11% of you are doing that. And finally, following up is offer recognition, about 4%. And there's some comments in the chat we can take a look at in a bit. So there you have it. We're going to close that one out. Highlight specific user content and offer incentives and personalized outreach. They're the big 3. Let's close that one out. Moving along. Scott has a quick question for everybody here. His webinar is coming up. That is Deep Dive into Composable Commerce. That's on August 2nd with Bright Sellers, Commerce Tool, and Applied Digital. What we want to ask you is this. So the question is, where's your tech stack in terms of using a composable architecture? Fully composable, nearly composable, getting started, evaluating and learning, or we've evaluated composable and are not moving in that direction for the time being. So let's see where we wind up. Okay, so it looks like it's, very definitely evaluating and learning at 50% of you. Getting started is the next biggest one. That's 29% of you. 14% of you are fully composable. And finally, we evaluated composable and not moving in that direction is 1%. Okay, let's move right along here. With all that done, I want to take some time and welcome our panelists. All right, Brian, Jazz, Nick, Gotham, you're all here. The gang's all here. How are you guys doing today?
Doing great. Glad to be here.
Amazing.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. Let's do this. Let's have everyone introduce themselves first. Let's have Jazz go first. We'll then go to Ryan. And hopefully I get this audio to stop doubling up in my headphones.
Thanks, Alan. So I'm Jazz. I'm the Challenger Brand Insights Manager for Colgate-Palmolive on our North America business. I work with my brands on trying to understand their consumers, whether it is from early stage innovation development all the way to creative and comms planning and testing. So anything that has to do with people, they come to me.
Beautiful. My name is Ryan Monahan. I am the Chief Marketing Officer for Redcon One. We are the fastest growing sports nutrition brand in history. We're distributed in 80 countries. We have 4 direct-to-consumer operations. We're based here in sunny South Florida.
And I'm Nick Kaplan. I lead growth strategy and innovation at Sadia, which is sort of a kind of a family office holdco that invests in distressed assets. And we own brands such as Lord & Taylor, New York & Company, and 14 total direct-to-consumer led businesses. And I'm super excited, as always, Alan, to be with you and be on the panel with such a great group.
Awesome. Yeah. And everyone should know me. My name's Gotham, but excited to be here.
All right. Great to have everyone here. What I want to do is I want to start off by talking about what exactly do we mean by UGC. Ryan, I'll give you the honors of going first.
Awesome. Would love to. So because we are really a wholesale, retail, omni-channel brand, UGC kind of plays multiple roles within our organization. But if we were to kind of reduce it all the way down and distill it, what is UGC for us? It's really the modern iteration of word of mouth marketing. It gives the opportunity for a consumer to hear from other consumers, their experience with the brand, the pros, the cons. So it really signifies that first touch point for our brand. Second, it really allows us to amplify the best value props from our reviews, middle and upper funnel, by partnering with UGC creators to be able to make sure our value props are compliant, but we can reach new audiences across multiple different channels, which is really the third piece at Redcon where we think about it. It's really attention is fragmented across a lot of different social channels. So the question is, how do we get the right message from authentic users, giving them the freedom to create the content that's true and real, but also hits on the value props that we're selling across the product. The last piece of it, it allows us both organically, but more importantly, through paid media to amplify and distribute this content to new audiences.
Awesome. Jazz, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you make a really good point about authentic, right? What we've found is consumers are really looking for someone to trust, and oftentimes, we've probably seen this in the influencer space. First it was influencer was a catch-all, then there were macro influencers and micro influencers, ones that have more reach versus more trust. And for us on the brand side, so multinational global brand, with lots of different audiences to service, we've really stayed in the marketing end of UGC, while most recently on the operational end and actually implementing that in strategy. But we've actually used UGC more for that reach, right? That awareness to drive awareness of our brands. But I do think, at least for us, there's definitely room to grow. I want to touch on one thing when it comes to user-generated content. There is a conscious user-generated content. I'm creating something for a brand. I know they're going to share it. I know they're going to use it to their advantage. Then there's sort of this unconscious part of UGC where I'm actually creating content for other users, right? I'm creating content to help other people who may want to buy the brand. And so sometimes the more unconscious it seems to be the most trustworthy for what we've seen.
Yeah, I liked your comment when we were doing the prep call that customers are starving for trust. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting and I'll refer to this a couple of times in the webinar, is when we have our pre-call discussions, it's always interesting from my perspective to see where everyone starts writing things down or leaning forward. Then we know we're onto some universal theme. I think we all agree that they're looking for that trust. Nick, you had some thoughts on that, how you defined trust, but you thought there was another aspect of quality that was an issue.
I think that the number one factor in a consumer's purchasing decision is price, and that's clear. I think what a lot of people don't think about, because it isn't something that's typically, in our vernacular, part of our everyday sort of speak, is trust. And so I think that we all kind of, when we stop to pause and think about it, recognize that it's incredibly important, but we don't really have any way to sort of sit down and say, does our consumer trust us or don't they trust us? And so I think as both Ryan and Jazz said, I think that what we're sort of trying to do with user-generated content is essentially go to an independent third party that's giving us an endorsement and ultimately building our credibility, our awareness, and our trust. I think that, it's interesting to sort of, go back to your comment about how and this has been a great group, by the way, in terms of riffing and kind of getting and thinking about composable. I mean, I think we talk a lot about composable commerce, but do we talk a lot about composable selling? Meaning, how are we going to sell in the future and what are we going to use? What are the arrows in our quiver to effectively meet her, which is often what we say, where she is? And I think that as we think about the most effective way to sell something to someone, it's essentially from peer to peer. And I think as an industry, and I've been around a bit, and I've seen us go from like one to all. I think we're in a kind of a one to many spot, and I think what user generated content does is it allows us, with the continual breakdown of barriers and the ability to sort of get out there beyond the confines of our four wall sites into the endless doors opening on the internet, is to sort of effectively lever these people in a way that gives us brand awareness, it gives us credibility, and I think most importantly, it gives us acquisition and ultimately revenue.
There's a lot to unpack out of all this, and we're going to do that. But I want Gotham to kind of give his view. I mean, obviously, you're kind of focused on the ratings and views portion of this, right? But I thought you made a couple of comments during our prep call. I thought it kind of explained why you thought about that. That's kind of the nexus and focus for you. I'll let you explain that.
Yeah, for sure. I think sort of everyone, Ryan, Nick, Jazz, kind of touched on it, but or I think Ryan put it really well, is like the next evolution of word of mouth feedback, right? Because the thing that I trust the most is when somebody I know tells me, hey, this is something that I need to look into. And then the second is when I see consistent other people that aren't affiliated with the brand, theoretically, telling me, hey, this is something that is worth purchasing. I don't regret purchasing this. And so that is the like kind of when we think of UGC, it's everything that plays into that. So you're talking discovery that can happen on social, Reddit, and just various other posts, blogs, and things like that, down to when you're at kind of the point of purchase. That's where I think reviews and ratings become super interesting to come into play, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I think the reason that we found reviews and ratings to be so interesting is because they really do have the ability to make huge influences right at the point of purchase, because they sit there almost right next to the purchase button, right? And so it's almost, you can think of it as, in a lot of ways, it's really interesting from a make or break perspective, because it could almost be, hey, everybody heard all this positive stuff on Reddit and Instagram and TikTok, and then they get to that purchase button and they see a 3.8 star rating and all of that's out the window. Mm-hmm. Or there's the vice versa of some other competitor brand had all that goodwill, got to the purchase button, they saw that product was a 3.8, but your product is a 4.3. So they've made the decision they're going to buy a product like this, but they make the spontaneous decision to switch over to you. And so I think that is the like the really interesting paradigm, and why we've started to really focus in on the reviews and rating side, is because I think people have always appreciated, hey, I need to have this star rating, I need to have this volume, but shoppers and actually technology, with all this AI stuff, is starting to move towards really exposing that content as well, and that's going to be a huge drive.
Mm-hmm. Been here.
Yeah, I think that's such an excellent point, and I think that someone who's had for time a pretty wide purview of the e-com operations, the acquisition of the customer, the ownership of the customer, I've always sort of thought about ratings and reviews as more operational. Is this panel that really made me start to think about ratings and reviews as user-generated content. And if you stop to think about it, and I think, often we're flying the plane. Sometimes you have to think about building the plane. And if you think about it, it's like, wow, it's actually the most important user-generated content. And I think one of the things we really talked about was, and I think Gotham is sort of beginning to allude to it, is like rating times number of reviews divided by customers who viewed the product in some factor of like who's bought the product equals a rating, right? So it's like, I think we talked a lot about light bulbs are really great examples. Like, why would you ever buy a branded light bulb ever again? You go on Amazon, you find the one that has like 5,000 plus reviews, and you see it having above a certain number. And I think Amazon's really conditioned us to look at that. So I think that this is an incredibly valuable tool. And I think it's one that's like not the traditional user generated content, but an incredibly important part of user generated content.
Let me play with that theme for a second, because it kind of blew my mind when I first was writing up this webinar and thinking about it. When I was a retailer back in the dark ages, like in 2005 and 2006, we were the number 7 customer on Bazaar Voice, and I saw ratings and reviews like, this is the most amazing thing ever. It's just incredible, and it had always been on my mind. Well, I got out of that in 2014. And as I'm talking to you individually, you're like, well, we just kind of think of it operationally. It's just kind of in the background. And I didn't understand it because I hadn't gone through the iterations. Like, I hadn't seen it become so ubiquitous that, well, of course, it's just what we do, right? Well, of course, we're looking at it. And then it kind of comes full circle in this conversation when I get everyone together, like, oh yeah, there is a lot there. Ryan, you're nodding your head. You want to jump in on that one? You want to give us your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Nick hit it on the head, and a couple different ways of, as we're thinking about product innovation, whether it's a new product within the same category, entering a new category, or a product expansion of a flavor or testing something. A lot of times we sit here and we talk to the world and expect the world to just accept what we're saying. And this is the way the product is intended to use. Jazz had brought that up yesterday. There's how we think consumers will use something and then how they actually do. And a lot of times our polishing on messaging, or what we see as actually most effective, comes from reviews. When we stop telling consumers, these are the 6 value props, and are they repeating it back and seeing commonality threads or trends amongst 1 or 2 that maybe we didn't value as high, but once you start getting it at scale. And then one last piece of that is UGC has an extremely powerful tool to get to decision makers. There's stuff that comes probably across Jazz or Nick's desk or myself, where it's like the user itself probably didn't have the intention of having the entire C-suite looking at a review. But if the information is rich and authentic, it can get the attention. Like as a megaphone, you don't have to be a full-blown influencer anymore. You could be a nano or a micro. We get the attention of a company CEO.
Oh, amen to that. I mean, that's why we always ask for feedback on these webinars and on our conferences. And I mean, it really, people have an outsized influence, especially when it's thoughtful commentary. You'll sit there and look at a couple of sentences and go, this person has encapsulated this is the problem, or this is the solution, or this is a great idea. That's the hint to everyone here on the webinar to give us your feedback at the end. But no, it really is. It really does give you an outsized influence on that. Jazz, you're from a CPG brand. I mean, it's, how does it impact you? How are you seeing this?
Yeah, what's interesting is, when we do internal research, a video is often something versus an entire 50-page quant report, right? A video is often what gets people's attention of someone saying, this didn't work for me, right? This didn't work. So I think the conversations around, shifting from thinking about the macro of how many reviews do we have and what's our star rating, down to what is the context of those reviews? What are people actually saying about our products? What I will say, even in a CPMG, fast moving consumer good company, our innovation lead times are a lot longer than maybe a tech company where you see a bug and you can kind of fix it in real time. And so trying to aggregate and understand what people are saying and find what is the most important thing to change now that can actually impact our conversion. And so I think that the KPI conversation that we were having, and also the ecosystem of UGC, how do we leverage that to really make actionable, because sometimes some actionable decisions, because sometimes we do have multiple things that people are talking about, multiple things that could be improved about the product, but what is the thing that we should focus on and develop in our development process to actually move the needle? So I think that's one of the questions.
But I think just to complement what Jazz was saying, sometimes we sell the same product. It can be a commodity, right? But we sell to very drastically different use cases. In our space, the way we sell to a bodybuilder would be fundamentally different than a CrossFitter. But if you're looking from the outside, oh, it's a fitness person. That's fundamentally true. But the reasons they're buying and the content that they're making, so we can actually make UGC content or partner with people the same product and have dramatically different types of content distributed across the same channels. So as we're thinking about UGC, we also look at the context of who's saying it, and then where do they sit? Are they our core avatar? Are they a secondary, tertiary? Just to complement what Jazz said, because in the same way, we can't make a product change to something that's on the shelf. That could take months and months to roll through. Whereas maybe it's a packaging, positioning, digital play. Are we better informing them up front, and how do we deliver that message?
Or highlighting what matters to them, right? I don't know the difference between a bodybuilder and a CrossFitter because I have neither of those, but understanding what value prop, what are they playing back to you? What are these different cohorts playing back to you? So you can put that into your comms and your digital communication. Sorry, Nick.
But I think that we talked a little bit about the role of generative AI on this yesterday, and how I think we look at generative AI in a way that sort of does things for us in the sense of like, oh, I'm going to sort of input output. And the reality is that a lot of people have noodled on, the sort of ability to write and replace writing in ChatGPT. The reality is, I think what OpenAI has done is, and the other bots too, but and platforms, is allow us to feed information in and process it at speeds we've never seen before, and distill that down to actionable kind of pieces of data. And as a person who preaches about commerce is the effect of like media and data, we think about content and its creation as a distribution to our world to build brand and drive engagement. The reality is, in addition to that, what sort of this moment is teaching me, as we're sort of, the fly the plane, build the plane, what I talked about before, is that we can actually take a lot of this information and distill it down to some very actionable data points. And as an industry that's trading on incrementality and basis points and not lightning in a bottle, I think we're continually looking for the insights and the analytics to help us make better decisions, to effectively kind of get insights into what our customers want, provide it for them so that we're not carrying so much inventory, we're converting faster, and we're keeping people longer. So I think that it is about sort of taking that data and bringing it to a place where we can sort of feed it into a machine and bring it down to, like, it's thinking about fireflies, right? You can either listen to the entire thing, or you can sort of have it distilled down to like the notes you need for the meeting. And it's not perfect, but you know what? It's pretty close. And I think that that's where we're heading right now. So I'd say that it isn't just about our ability to sort of get the rating. It's our ability to use the information inside the rating to make better decisions and trade up a little bit.
And what's great about, sorry.
No, please.
I just thought, as Nick was talking, I was like, what's great about reviews is how structured they are, right? Mm-hmm. So they're actually tied to a quant level KPI, like 1 through 5. And so you have the context along with, so if I say something's, 3 stars, I can talk about what's good about it, and I can talk about what was not so good about it. And so it gives context to that number. Whereas, in social, if we're scraping and analyzing social, oftentimes it's very unstructured and isn't necessarily linked to a general KPI. So I think what helps us when it comes to the analysis part is also having that piece. But I just had a random thought.
Well, let's talk about that. When we talked about KPIs, I think it came up in conversation. Well, it's a number of reviews. And then was like, well, it's a number and the quality of reviews. Well, it's a timeliness of reviews, because we may have learned something about the product, made a change about it, and now it's different. It's either better or it's worse. How do you get rid of unverified reviews? So I want to hit on, I want to try to trigger that same discussion around that KPI. Then I want to talk about quality and then making the business case, because I think those are the 3 things at the kind of the core of this conversation. So Jazz, you mentioned the KPI issue once or twice, and I know that Nick and Ryan were feverishly working on it on our call as well. So let me open up to the group. Who wants to take a first stab at what you think a more enlightened, a more nuanced KPI would look like? What are you watching when it comes to user-generated content? And what do you think we could do to be better at it now that we can monitor it so well?
I don't want to step on a toe. I know Nick will jump in at any point here. I can help start to tee him up.
You know me so well already.
Subject matter
You've just met.
Yes. But I would say, for us, again, we're a consumer packaged good. It's a commodity product. So when we look at reviews, step one, if we kind of go like college first year, first class, we're looking at just what's the volume of reviews we're getting and what's the general feedback. Like, is there an issue? Are we on track? As it starts to get to level 2, because our product is a consumable also, the question is, if we expect somebody, I'm just making up the date, to order every 30 days and reviews to fall in these timelines, the question is, are we seeing the repeat purchases the same way? So when we start to look at volume based on purchase behavior specific to our segment, and then the third part of it is not just reviews as a whole, but I mean, if we're totally honest, many brands like to publish 3, 4, 5s, don't like to publish 1s and 2s. But really the reality is, if you take a step back and go, let's take all the very negative ones. What's the issue we're having? Is this our brand health? So is this, we launched new Pepsi and people don't like it? That might be a very easy way to measure if somebody says it. But the kind of underlining message that we see in the negative reviews are there maybe product issues? Because somebody took the time to stop and write something negative. We expect a little venting, but we look kind of at the polar opposites. What are the worst reviews we're getting? And are there actual substantive problems? You're not going to be a brand for everybody all the time, but is it a common thread? And then on the reverse side, what are the really raving reviews coming from brand evangelists? And are there ways we can amplify that? So we kind of look at it, again, as a consumable product, as the health of our consumer set. How many are we getting? Are we getting them on, at the steady flow? And then do we see these UGC kind of content then dripping into the upper funnel? Are we seeing these KPIs across social signals? Are we part of the conversation? So that's kind of how we start to think about, KPIs around healthy reviews and UGC content.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'll, as prompted, jump in. And I think we were noodling a little bit, and I'll preface this by saying, like, I'm making this up as I go, because I love
fine.
math, and I assume that people are on here listening to this because they want sort of insightful things versus known. I think we talked about net promoter score, right? You sort of throw out the middle, you take the extremes, and then you're able to sort of then distill that to a score. I think that and I think that plays here, by the way, right, to what Ryan is saying. I think we have to look at the bottom and the top. The middle is the middle. And I think that if we look at that and figure out how to, extrapolate that and then correlate that to our customer data, because again, going back to this whole notion of today, right? Today, you don't have to be running SAP or a Salesforce environment to get this amazing data. There's so many products that allow you to sort of take your data, pipe it through, get it out, and action on it. And so we could probably, without real effort, take who our customers are in their reviews, who they are as our customers, and begin to understand their behaviors. Because again, what we're trying to do in this sort of like cookieless world and soon to be UTM-less world and this craziness that's happening, we're trying to find people and understand their behaviors. And the users that sort of make content, the users that choose to be a brand evangelists, that choose to take the time to write 1,000-word terrible review, there's clearly something there. And I think it's up to us to sort of begin to get into it and figure out ways to utilize it to be able to understand, because those are the people that can help us in a time where we're an evolving, ever-changing industry. And anyone dealing with a consumer, by the way, whether it's a car company, it's Colgate-Palmolive, it's anybody needs information to be able to sort of evolve intelligently and narrow the gap between the known and the unknown. So I think that I am actually like now literally playing around with some math to try to figure out how we can ultimately really come up with an equation and beginning to think about, where it's a little anonymized at times through the logged in versus not logged in, and how we sort of bring that to the customer piece, and also grappling with like, we do publish our reviews, but like, how do you take all the bad and put it out there, and how do you act against it, and what does that mean in the customer journey? So,
yeah, if you figure it out, let me know.
Yeah,
we're connected now,
do
so
tell.
definitely will.
Do tell. Gautam, I want to get you back in here. I was not trying to shut you out.
Oh, no, not at all. I think, no, what Ryan said, what Nick said about this makes a ton of sense. I think what we see, so like we're a technology platform that analyzes reviews and ratings. So what we look to do is do things a lot at scale, and what new use cases and ways to analyze it open up at scale. And so one of them is like I'll tell you, some of the most valuable feedback or reviews that our clients have had is actually a 5-star review where it talks about 4 positive things and then the last sentence is negative. Because that's where you start to get into the nuance side of things. And so what it really starts to become is this ability to just understand what is every single theme being talked about in every single review. What are the ones that come up like commonly in reviews? Are people talking about taste along with texture 90% of the time? Things like that. I think the other big thing is context, which means, okay, hey, we have 30,000 reviews, but our 3 biggest competitors each also have 30,000 reviews. So where are we ranking according to them? What are people talking about more in our products than their products? Okay, that can inform that we should start to emphasize this more, or where are we doing better than other people? I think the other thing to note, and this is where we can start to talk about how is like the shopper journey going to change with all of this open AI and large language models. Nick made the great point of like, hey, being able to like digest text is one of the like positive things of something like open AI. This is going to start to open up to consumers as well. So a few folks might know this. Amazon has been testing review summaries on some of their pages. So on the Amazon app, for a few products, they literally just give a paragraph of this is what people are talking about in the reviews. This is what like, hey, this is an air purifier. This is doing really well from a noise perspective. It's doing really poorly from a durability perspective. Now, you just fast forward that, this is going to start to show up on every single product, right? Which means as a shopper, they now not only have easy exposure to a star rating and a volume to understand how many people are buying this and do they like it, but now why do they like it? So within 5 seconds, I as a shopper can learn all of that. So if that is what Amazon, and then you can kind of do the math and say, okay, other retailers will follow. If this is going to become the new norm, then it's almost necessity for brands to have that visibility plus more to understand what is going to be sort of the trigger point that's going to cause people to say yes to this. So all the paradigm shifts that are happening within businesses, I think the really interesting is you sometimes see, okay, hey, it hits B2B and then it hits B2C in kind of a longer time frame. This is actually going to happen within months of each other. So the paradigm's really going to shift in content, and what people say in reviews honestly grows exponentially because of that.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jazz.
No, I mean, I'm wondering how they're going to parse out the difference between preference and like objectivity, because I mean, in our business, like, I don't like the fragrance, I don't like the color, I don't like the taste, those are very subjective preferences, and they're very personal to you. And so, when we do and analyze reviews, we often take into account preferences versus, objective issues or objective, praises of the product itself. And so I wonder how the summaries are going to do that. That's just a question for the industry.
Yeah. So to Gautam's point, it's almost like for the Amazon, it's almost like those old restaurant Zagat reviews, right? Where they had little snippets from everyone's thing to give you a composite. We have 2 minutes, and I think we're going to run a little late if I can do this, because there's 2 questions I want to ask. First, this is an audience question. What AI tools are recommended for processing UGC content to get summary insights? This kind of folds right in to what Gautam was saying about ChatGPT. I know we do it when we look at things. It may be more of an issue of how to do it. Like, give me the top 3 words, give me the top 3 concepts in 3, in 1 sentence describe. But are there any other AI tools out there? This is an open question anyone can answer.
No. You probably
ChatGPT
better
is it?
take the whole thing, like paste every single. I think you could do what Amazon's doing. Literally, just take the whole thing into some kind of a flat file, or even like a Notepad, Word, whatever, and just dump it into ChatGPT and say, give me 5 sentences to summarize this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
It's
There's-
no
that's what
different
we've been
than
doing.
scraping tools too. There's tons of stuff out there that scrapes data from the web. So if you have the technical resources to deal with that, which like companies like ours do, you could do it. If you're like an SMB and you don't have those resources, dump it in ChatGPT.
And then
Do it with
also
your
maybe
competitors.
one other way to think about it is it's the exact opposite of the question you asked, but it becomes tactical. Over the last year, the conversations we have with Walmart buyer are what kind of UGC content are you going to be producing or partnering with or looking for? And so it's not just what we're deducing from the reviews and the information, but the second part is understanding the audience in which we're producing the content or sharing with. For example, the content for CVS, they want people to be aware that you can get premium product at CVS. And so even if we were to put it into a flat file and kind of bring it all the way down, I think to add one more layer is understanding the audience and where you're going to distribute it or who's going to be viewing it. When we're showing it to Walmart, they're looking for something very specific. They gave us a stat. It may have changed now. This is about 6 months old, but 60% of they're tracking up to 60% of TikTok content from an influencer to in-store sales. And the only thing I'm taking away from that is there's probably no perfect way to measure, but there is a correlation. So they're starting to think about it. So for us, it's not about being perfect. It's understanding what they're looking for and having an ongoing conversation with the buyers on what type of content is best resonating, just to make sure that we're a good fit, not just for in-store. We know we're a good fit, but also from a consumer purchasing standpoint to make sure that they understand this is the right product to get here. It fits at CVS in the same way as it would fit in a vitamin shop.
All right. So we're at the top of the hour. I want to ask one last question. If everyone could just give me a couple extra minutes of time. Nick, when we were talking one-on-one, I asked you what question should I have asked, and you talked about making the business case, and I thought that led to some interesting commentary. I'll just ask you your question back to you. Let's talk about the business case for using UGC. What does that look like?
I mean, I think every business case is made through the customers, right? I mean, I think that what businesses often don't do is value themselves based on their customer files. And I think that there isn't a direct input output situation in this world. I mean, certainly there is progress being made in attribution and understanding outside of the affiliate networks, which is complicated and cumbersome to be able to see the ROI or ROAS or IROAS or whatever it is that you're looking at, because it is spend. But I think that, the business case requires some ability to be sort of progressive thinking and sort of non-linear in the sense of, look, at the most primitive, like sort of basic level, right? We spend money, we get something back. That getting back is sort of the overall, in my opinion, it's the customers that we acquire, right? Because the byproduct that would be the EBITDA and revenue that we typically talk about. So I'd say the business case is to sort of understand an expectation beginning at the end, which is my customer file is going to grow, right? I've got two types of customers. I've got new customers and I've got existing customers. And you obviously have reactivated and lapsed, but we don't need to focus there. And so I want to know week in and week out that my file's growing or it's gaining sort of momentum, and that's either as measured through my existing staying, new people coming, which can be many different ways. Look, I love Meta and Google. I mean, we do a ton of business with them across kind of all the things I work on, so I'm not going to speak ill of them. At the same time, the pandemic has changed the economics of those channels as acquisition vehicles and what their role in the process is. And so I think as we think about the user generated piece, as we think about interesting, innovative ways to sell, as we think about the changing economics of our business and our opportunity to manage our inventories effectively and to drive new customers effectively and economically, I'd say this plays a huge role. And as a huge proponent of like brand as media and the ability to take media and distribute and put it in hands of consumers and our sort of peer-to-peer selling that's coming, and you walk down the street and you see Ryan's shirt, you're like, wow, that's awesome. I take a picture, I look on Google visual search, I find it, and I buy it. And I think that the business case isn't so input output. I think you have to really be thinking about measuring consumers and sort of saying this is a new ROAS driven model, but one that's not measured through last touch or some view through attribution. I think it really requires vision, which based on everything that I've just heard in this call and I'm seeing every day, if you don't have it and you're not Colgate-Palmolive, you're done, you're dead. So I mean, I guess the answer is not, there isn't an exact way to measure this, but to say it's a line item in your P&L, it's in the marketing budget, I'm assuming, not your operations budgets. I historically thought maybe, especially with ratings, that you need to invest in looking at this data, using it to grow, make better business decisions. And ultimately, your measurement is the growth of your customer file, period, the end.
Yep, I agree.
And you know what, Nick, just a last note.
This will be the last word. You have it.
I think what you're saying dovetails with the fact that consumer skepticism is at an all-time high. And so this, one to many sort of model that we've had in the past is dead, and you're dead if you're only using that model. And so, Alan, bring us home with a tactical takeaway.
I think I will. And I'm going to talk to the man with the awesome shirt with that. Ryan, lay it upon us, brother.
So going back to kind of the AI question, I think it comes down to how we think about it. So I'll just give you like my hacky way of putting it together. Going with Yogi is going to be that's what they do, right? But before you get there, one of the things we do is we use a software called Tribe just to collect everybody who's talking about us. We download all of the video. It does it for you. And we use a tool called Otter AI to transcribe everything. Yep. And then we start to bring that into ChatGPT. So I felt just to make sure that we didn't miss, how do I get a video into ChatGPT? It's super low key. Download it, have it transcribed through a tool, and then bring that into an AI tool to help you pull everything together.
That's brilliant. Yeah, that's exactly the way and I'm glad we ended on that. All righty. Well, aside from your awesome shirt, Ryan, thank you for that great tactical takeaway. Gautam, thank you to you and to Yogi for sponsoring today. Without you guys, we couldn't make this possible. Nick, Jazz, thank you both. I appreciate all the time and effort. I know we had an extra meeting on this to get everyone up to speed, but I think it was worth it. And just thanks to you, our audience, for taking the time to join us today. We appreciate your continued interest and support. We hope we gave you a 5-star session today. Please take a moment to share your thoughts in the survey that you'll be directed to at the end of the webinar. I'm Alan Dick, and on behalf of everyone here at Commerce Next, we hope you have a great rest of the week. Take care, everyone. We'll see you later.